In 1974, a farmer digging a well in central China broke through a layer of compacted earth and fell into a chamber that had been sealed for over 2,000 years. What he found wasn't gold. It was a face, life-size, made of clay, staring back at him from the darkness. That single discovery led archaeologists to one of the most extraordinary sights on Earth. Thousands of terracotta warriors, an underground army, a buried city the size of a small town, constructed beneath a hill that looked like it had always been there. But here's the thing. The real tomb, the place where the emperor himself was buried, has never been opened. Not once. And the scientists who studied it most closely chose to walk away. This is not the only place like that. There are sites on this planet where governments have passed laws forbidding entry, where courts have ruled that a specific door must stay permanently sealed, where archaeologists arrived with full equipment, ran their scans, confirmed something extraordinary was inside, and then packed up and left. Not because they couldn't get in, because they decided not to. And once you understand why the reasoning becomes harder to argue with, let's start in China, because what happened there is unlike anything else in the archaeological record. The mound rises 76 meters above the surrounding plain. From a distance, it looks like a natural hill, something shaped by erosion over centuries. But it isn't. Every single cubic meter of it was placed by human hands. Workers carried soil and stone to this location for decades without stopping. It took over 50 years to build. And everything we know about what's inside comes from two sources: ancient texts written by people who witnessed the construction firsthand, and modern ground-penetrating radar that has never produced a false result on this site. The historian Sima Qian wrote about the interior roughly a century after the tomb was sealed. He described a vast underground palace, a ceiling embedded with pearls arranged to represent constellations, a floor mapped out to mirror the entire empire, with rivers running across it. Rivers of liquid mercury. That detail, the mercury, sounded like poetic exaggeration for 2,000 years. Then, soil samples were taken directly from the mound. The mercury concentrations in the earth above the burial chamber were between 1,000 and 8,000 times higher than normal background levels. Not slightly elevated, not anomalous. Off the scale entirely. The rivers are real. Think about that. A liquid metal ecosystem, sealed underground for 2 millennia, still active, still evaporating slowly through layers of stone and compacted soil. Anyone who entered without industrial-grade respiratory protection would begin absorbing mercury vapor within minutes. The neurological effects wouldn't appear immediately. That's what makes it more dangerous, not less. You wouldn't know you were being poisoned until it was already done. But that wasn't the real reason they stopped. When archaeologists in the 1970s excavated the outer pits, the ones containing the Terracotta Army, they made a mistake that still haunts the entire field. The warriors were painted, vivid pigments, red armor, black lacquer, skin tones applied with fine brushes, individual faces, each one different from the last. The craftsmen who made them spent years on the details, and it showed. Every figure was unique. Within 4 minutes of exposure to open air, the paint began to flake. Within an hour, centuries of color had vanished completely. The gray figures we see in photographs today are ghosts of what they actually looked like. The oxygen destroyed in 60 minutes what 2,000 years underground had perfectly preserved. The main chamber is estimated to contain silk textiles, carved wood, lacquered furniture, documents written on organic material, administrative records, possibly maps, possibly texts that exist nowhere else on Earth. There is no technology currently available that could create a sealed, climate-controlled environment large enough to excavate that chamber without destroying everything inside it on contact with outside air. They could open it. They decided not to. The site remains officially protected under Chinese law. No excavation permits have been issued for the central mound. The official position is clear and consistent. We will wait until we can do it without loss. That moment has not yet arrived, and until it does, the hill sits exactly as it was left, sealed, monitored, and completely untouched at its core. Most people have never heard of the second site on this list. It sits in the west of Turkey, near an ancient settlement called Teos. On the surface, it looks unremarkable. A low rise in the landscape, scattered stone ruins, the kind of terrain that looks picked over by decades of fieldwork. Archaeologists had worked the surrounding area for years without incident. Then, in the early 2000s, illegal excavators broke into a sealed burial chamber at the edge of the site. They were looking for gold. Within hours, several of them became seriously ill. The Turkish authorities arrived, cordoned off the entire area, and brought in hazmat response teams. What they found inside was not what anyone had prepared for. The chamber was intact, sealed for roughly 2,400 years. And the air inside what remained of it contained measurable concentrations of toxic compounds. Arsenic-based minerals had been deliberately worked into the construction material. Sulfur deposits lined sections of the walls. Combined with centuries of microbial activity in a completely anaerobic environment, the chamber had become a slow chemical reactor, a gas trap that had been building pressure, metaphorically speaking, for over 2 millennia. But there was something else. The biological samples taken from the interior walls showed fungal colonies that didn't match anything in the standard reference databases. Organisms that had adapted over thousands of years to survive with no oxygen, no light, and no nutrients, except the slow decay of whatever organic material had been sealed inside with the burial. No one knows what those organisms would do if introduced to a modern immune system. No one wants to find out. The team was evacuated. The chamber was resealed with concrete. They sealed it again. Monitoring equipment was installed at the perimeter. The site remains under observation, and the full contents, whatever the burial chamber held, remain exactly where they were placed in the 4th century BC. Not because the archaeologists lacked curiosity, because they understood what they were dealing with. Now we go underground, beneath a living city, Alexandria, Egypt. Population over 5 million people. One of the busiest ports on the Mediterranean coast. A city built layer by layer, century by century, directly on top of its own ancient foundations. Somewhere beneath it is the tomb of Alexander the Great. This is not a theory. It is a historical fact, supported by multiple independent ancient sources. After Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC, his body was embalmed with great care and transported to Egypt. A massive mausoleum was constructed. Roman emperors visited it as a pilgrimage site. Julius Caesar stood before the sarcophagus. Augustus reportedly placed a wreath of flowers on the glass lid. And then, at some point between the 3rd and 5th century AD, it disappeared. Not from the earth, from human knowledge. Earthquakes hit Alexandria repeatedly during that period. Civil violence. The slow collapse of institutional memory as empires fell, and the city changed hands multiple times across generations. The exact location was lost before anyone thought to record it with enough precision to be useful. What remains is a modern metropolis. And beneath that city, at depths that would require demolishing inhabited residential buildings to reach, there are ancient structures that radar surveys have begun to map in fragments: tunnels, foundation walls, sealed voids at depths consistent with Hellenistic-era construction, in exactly the area where ancient sources placed the royal quarter. But here's the thing. To excavate at those depths in central Alexandria, you would need to relocate thousands of residents. You would need to shut down major traffic corridors for years, not months. You would risk destabilizing foundations that currently support active buildings above busy streets. The Egyptian government has consistently declined to authorize any investigation on that scale, and the diplomatic complications around what happens to any potential remains have stalled every serious proposal for decades. The most sophisticated ground-penetrating surveys ever conducted beneath that part of the city produced anomalies that no one has followed up on with physical excavation. The traffic moves above it every day. The buildings stand, and somewhere in the dark below, if the ancient sources are accurate, and they were accurate about other things, something is waiting that has been waiting for 1,700 years. The last site is different from all the others. Not because of mercury, not because of organisms sealed in stone, not because of a city built on top of it, because of a door. The Padmanabhaswamy Temple in southern India has stood for centuries as one of the most sacred sites in the region. In 2011, a Supreme Court order directed a formal survey of its underground storage vaults. 5 chambers were opened under official supervision. What was found inside had been sealed since at least the early 19th century. Gold coins by the thousands minted across different civilizations and different eras. Roman currency, Napoleonic-era pieces, Indian royal mint, objects with no recorded history of how they arrived there, jeweled crowns, solid gold statues. The total estimated value of what was recovered from those 5 chambers exceeded $20 billion. Then the survey team reached the 6th vault, Vault B. The door is iron, massive, and covered in relief carvings, 2 cobras facing outward, positioned as if guarding the threshold. And here is what separates this from every other sealed space in this story. There is no visible lock, no keyhole, no external mechanism, no handle, no hinges on the outside. Structural engineers brought in specifically to assess the door could not determine how it had been sealed or what a forced entry attempt would do to the structure around it. Ground-penetrating scans confirmed a substantial void on the other side, larger, by most estimates, than any single one of the 5 chambers that had already been opened. No one moved. The Supreme Court of India ruled that Vault B must remain closed. Not because of toxic air, not because of structural instability in the conventional sense, but because there was no agreed framework for what should happen next legally, politically, socially, and because the court concluded that stability mattered more than discovery, at least for now. The door is still there. Would you open it, knowing you had no way to predict what was waiting on the other side? Knowing that 5 other chambers had already produced more than most national treasuries hold? Knowing that the door itself gave no indication of how it was sealed or what it was protecting or from what? The Indian government made its decision. The vault remains closed. There's a pattern across all of these places, and it's worth pausing to name it clearly. In each case, the technology existed to attempt entry. The funding could have been secured. The location was known, or close enough to known to begin work. There were people ready to go in. What stopped them was something else entirely. Sometimes it was the certainty of destruction, the knowledge that opening the tomb would erase the very thing they came to find. Sometimes it was direct physical danger to the team that would have to make the first move. Sometimes it was a legal structure that prioritized collective stability over individual discovery. And in at least one case, it was simply a door that no one could explain and that no court was willing to risk. These aren't failures of science. They are decisions, cold, considered, documented decisions made by archaeologists and courts and governments. that concluded the same thing independently. What's inside is more valuable, sealed than opened, at least until the tools exist to do it without loss. The Emperor's Mound still reads toxic at the surface. The scans beneath Alexandria still show anomalies that no permit covers. The Turkish chamber sits behind concrete and wire. Vault B stands exactly as it did on the day the survey team stopped in front of it and stepped back. Whatever is inside those places has been waiting for a very long time. The instruments still give the same readings. No one argues with them anymore. Lost History Uncovered publishes every week cases that didn't make it into textbooks. Subscribe if this is the kind of history you want more of. Vault B? Should it be opened? Or are some answers better left in the dark? Tell us below.